Hi, and welcome back to the Telling All podcast. I'm your host, Juan Rodriguez. Hi, how are ya? Thanks for joining me after a brief break last week. Just to keep you guys updated, I had a bit of spring maintenance to take care of, and I appreciate your patience, and I'm glad that we can jump right back into the swing of things. I'm very grateful for the perspective that I have now on quite a few things, and I'm very grateful that I was able to get everything done in a timely manner. It's been a very busy week, and I'm sure everyone's had a busy week. So I just am so very glad that you're here to join me amidst your busy schedules. To count some of the little victories that I had, I quit vaping last week. Nicotine is now no longer in my toolbox of coping mechanisms, which is pretty dope, I gotta say. I also successfully performed and resuscitated my lawnmower from the grave. Don't know if anyone is like me and never had to mow a lawn a day in their life up until just a few years ago. And it's really weird. I'm actually grateful for it. It's pretty calming. It's something that's very soothing for me. And there's a level of pride that I have in freshly cut grass once a week. And the maintenance that was required was jump starting the battery, which is okay once in a while, the oil change, looking at the blades, which are pretty dinged up, and weighing the cost of some new ones. And I know this stuff is so riveting, but boy, I get such a kick out of researching and actually implementing the things that I learn. So that's just one of the little things. And there's some cleaning going around. You can see, if you're on video, you can see that there's a green screen behind me. And that's one that's not so easy to take apart and put together. So it's just there for a little bit. I figured it makes sense to just hop in and get right into it. So with enough of a preamble and lawn talk, should I call it shop talk? This is now episode 5, and the life lessons that I wanted to incorporate into this episode, as well as the title, would be perspective and letting go. And it's something that we often all hear, or at least a lot of the people that I've spoken to, that sometimes everything's just a matter of perspective. So sometimes articulating your perspective can help you let go of some of the stories you tell yourself in everyday life about things that may have happened to you, have happened to others, and sometimes you get that one piece of the puzzle that can change how you view a situation entirely. And I just wanted to let that kind of rock. I don't know if you guys have noticed, I actually don't write much down for these so far. I have a structure in mind, and I'm working my way towards it. I have a lot of things that I want to implement into the solo episodes, which has just been about 5 solo episodes now. And I'm recording this one just in case my guest doesn't line up this week, but I actually got to meet a really good friend today. And we had some burritos, and we took a walk around an asylum, and it was just such a great time. And I'm so glad, and I'm very happy. I'm filled with joy. So I'm a little more upbeat today, and I'm trying this thing out where I'm actually saying things with my chest. So let's see how the volume carries out on this episode. The feedback I got last week was that I was a little too quiet. So let's see how this works. But just knowing that I can kind of bank these episodes and not have to worry so much about getting them out by the quota, it lets me have a bit of a cushion to let you get a peek behind the curtain, so to speak. And knowing that I have multiple guests that are willing to hop on, I am actually fooling around with Google Calendars, and so that I can incorporate that into the structure as well. And there'll be more on that later. Now, the simple fact of the matter is, today's offered a lot of new perspectives on some old problems, and I find myself returning to joy almost instinctually at this point, and it's actually kind of uplifting, to say the least. And speaking of gratitude, I met a friend who gave me this awesome Grateful Dead butterfly pin that I get to keep under my beard. It's actually pretty sweet, if I do say so myself. But it's the little things is my whole point. And sometimes I think we forget that choice actually feeds into our perspectives. So, a simple example of that would be focusing on what you have versus what you don't. And what I have right now is everything that I need. And what I don't have, even if I may want or desire it, doesn't actually suit me right here, sitting in my seat, recording, or planning my day. Especially when my day is filled with opportunities to help those I love and that love me. And I got to do a lot of that today, and I'm just so moved by it all because it's been a rough couple weeks, guys. I don't know if you can tell. Probably not. 30 minutes a week, I think. We've all had a couple. It's been touch and go for a little bit, but just returning to that feeling of gratitude, the entire purpose of this podcast, it has helped me kind of push through and really get to the little victories that I keep thinking about day by day. And it's the perspective, because if you qualify your victories as little, does that mean that they're lesser in magnitude? No, I just mean that you break up the bigger victories into smaller bite-sized chunks, manageable goals, so that you can actually have the appropriate level of excitement. And you can kind of use that as momentum to just keep driving you forward. And when I tell you, I jammed more into the first 10 hours of this day than I thought possible, and I still have another 6 to go. I mean, I'm kind of fired up, and I've got a great weekend planned ahead, and it's just a matter of perspective, because now on the other side of the obstacles, that gratitude can come in. But what would it be like if we were grateful during the hard times, during the struggle, during the push up that hill? Ooh, move the mic. During the push up that hill. Because that's what it's all about. It's doing what you say you're going to do and then achieving it and congratulating yourself. Because how long does that feeling of satisfaction actually last once you complete that goal? I mean, seriously. I know for me, it's constantly moving on to the next thing just to keep myself going, because motivation for me is a myth. But I'm speaking subjectively, of course, but it's really that simple. It's that perspective that, how am I going to feel on the other side of accomplishing this goal? Can I use that as source in the present? As a source of fuel, that is to say. Can I use that to keep me going when things are hard? Whew. Watched one of my best friends figuring out a very difficult editing problem in real time last night. And when I tell you, whatever I was going through, watching him continue to go and go, and my perspective from the outside was, I don't know what's going through his head, but I see him pausing, trying again, and I see him not giving up. And when I tell you, stuff like that inspires the hell out of me. Big things are coming, is my point. And I just love that for him, and I love that I get to be a part of these moments, and I get to watch from the outside in as he sets a goal and accomplishes it, sets another and accomplishes it, and then figures out whether he can or can't do something, researches it, and then accomplishes it. And this entire time I'm sitting there doing this or doing that, or just watching in awe. And it's a matter of perspective, in the sense that, like my coach used to say, if you can do it once, you can do it every time. And when I'm looking at other people, I see them do it every time, and I'm just clapping in the background, and not sarcastically. It's that Shia LaBeouf gif where he's just at his own whatever it is. But it really comes down to how you look at things. Is this obstacle something that's going to tear me down, or is it something that's going to make me stronger in the long run? Is it something that's going to affect my self-esteem, or is it something that's going to give me proof that I am exactly who I say I am? These are the things that I think about, especially as they relate to things like philosophy and Stoicism, where they say things like the obstacle becomes the way. And all that means is sometimes the way out is through whatever's in front of you. Instead of doing what I would have done sometimes in the past, which is turning tail and running the opposite direction, sometimes you have to charge forward and face your fears, and you find out that there was really nothing worth being afraid of in the end. And a lot of the things that you tell yourself will happen or might happen or will go a certain way, They just don't. And it's because you don't have that perspective of yourself on top of the hill or on top of a dune. All the best hunters scale the tallest dune before they begin their hunt. Am I right? Now, rolling with that dune rolling in with that dune reference, yet another one, going into that part of the second movie where they mention giving water. And I wanted to mention that simply because perspective applies to culture as well. This fictional culture considers water to be sacred, and they don't give their bodies moisture freely for almost anything. And it's something that I think they did a pretty good job explaining in the first movie. They did a great job explaining in the books. It's a lot more intricate with their cultural norms and things of that nature, but apply that to the real world. You have the fictional Fremen that are very particular with what happens with the water in their society. You have some cultures where, they make sure to thoroughly wash their hands, but they eat with their hands primarily for a lot of their dishes. And for someone in America, that might come off as something to worry about. But perspective is what it's all about when it comes to these situations. This is the norm for them where they're from, or that's what it is here. It's a melting pot. It's an opportunity to experience all these different cultures because people bring what they can here. And, they say things like home is where the heart is, right? And Iron Sheik, they have a little play on that. They say home is where the heart stays. And when the heart strays, home is where we are today. And that always sticks with me. And I love that very much because it's a very helpful tool for perspective. Because when the heart strays can mean something to many people, and sometimes it strays from the physical home because you're out in the world doing what needs to be done for your loved ones. And I can always respect people that travel for work or travel to impact as many people as possible. I choose to do that from this chair for the time being, and that's a beautiful thing. But going back to that perspective on home, we all have emotional homes as well. And that's something that you go back to what's familiar. So if you're used to being sad or addicted to it like I was, or if you're used to being happy and jovial and just upbeat, it's just coming natural to you, that's more or less your emotional home. And you return there more often than not, and anything outside of that is kind of outside of the norm. But that perspective is very, very important because with practice and with time, you can let go of whatever your emotional home may be that doesn't actually suit your needs. For me, it's focusing on the locus of control, things I can control and things that I can't. And for some, that emotional home can be something you're very used to, something that is almost an automatic pattern of retreat to what is familiar. So for me, it was always kind of an introverted retreat into the self, and I found that place was just, I don't want to say miserable because that's what I was, but it's a matter of that place being not one filled with joy. And it was all a matter of perspective and letting go. And that takes me to things like the locus of control, which is just what you can control in your life versus the things you don't have any control over. Going back to things like the serenity prayer, having the wisdom to know the difference between the things you can change and the things you can't. There is some truth to that. I'd say there's a lot of truth. And for me, I was always dwelling in the past or projecting into the future and never really spending much time in the present. And I learned The Power of Now, which is the title of a book by Eckhart Tolle. And being present and grounded actually helped me kind of adjust my perspectives on a lot of things and realize that I was blessed. And that leaving that emotional home that I was so used to kind of felt like betraying myself, betraying my sense of identity. This is who I've always been. But the truth of the matter is, if it doesn't support you in reaching your goals, is it something that you want to have a part of you? And that's not saying that you have to have a radical personality change or anything like that, but when people look at you and they have all these nice things to say and you're thinking about how you view yourself, then it's time to be empirical and question everything, because the simple fact is you know everything about yourself, or at least you think you do. The only thing you don't know is how you're appearing on the outside, unless, like myself, you happen to record yourself in a room or you talk to yourself in a mirror, or you have people giving you feedback as to how you're appearing, because you might think that you're very calm and collected, but the fact of the matter is you might be coming off aggressive and talking with your hands, and it's all a matter of perspective, because to someone who's of Latin descent, talking with your hands is nothing new. It's kind of emphasis. It's just something that happens, especially when you're excited, right? But to others, fast hand movements might be something that doesn't always make them feel so safe. And sometimes being able to step out of your own shoes into those of somebody else, at least for a moment, you kind of take stock of these things. And it's beautiful. Because every time you do that, you nudge yourself towards whatever your center might be, where you don't have to question your perspective versus someone else's. Because at the end of the day, you can't control how people interpret things, and you also can't control the differences in your perceptions of any given exchange. And the most I've found helpful approach is to try to meet in the middle and have some form of understanding be met in these exchanges, because honestly, you don't know what can set somebody off, and you never know the reason. And unless people share these things, you kind of walk blindly into them. But that's the beauty of building relationships and rapport with anyone, your coworkers, your friends, your strangers on the street. It's just healthy boundaries and letting people know, whoa, I didn't like that way you said that, and it has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with me. And I realize that the trigger for this reaction is the size of a hair, and there's no way you could have avoided it even if you knew. But just moving forward, hey, would it be cool if we tried something different? But in being empirical and questioning everything, there's often a pitfall or a trap that can be made where you start to overanalyze, and you get that analysis paralysis where every decision is played out to its logical end, when really you just have to be present and focus on the now. Read your context clues, your body language, or just ask questions. Adjust your perspective and let go of anything that just doesn't serve you. And what I mean by that is harboring on things in the past that you can't change is addicting when it comes to my experience. But no matter what you do, you can't change these things, and letting go of that habitual thinking or dwelling on these previous moments, it frees up a lot of brain power to be put into other facets of life. And it's wonderful and it's great when you're able to do it the first time, because going back, if you can do it once, you can do it every time. And it's not always going to be easy. But I promise, if you keep at it, it will be rewarding, and it'll be something that you just might want to do as long as you can. Because that perspective, you watch people struggle with whatever they're struggling with, and everybody's fighting a battle you know nothing about. So if you attack them, they're now fighting two battles. I saw that in a meme somewhere. It was really inspiring because it ties back into Sonder, that word from last week. And the beauty of that is sometimes just holding space and letting people come to you in their own time can change that perspective, because I know in my experience, often I feel as though I'm drowning when really I'm face down in a puddle, or I'm face down in shallow water, and if I just stand up, I'll be fine. Or even worse, I'm face down in a puddle and I'm thinking I'm fighting for my life when somebody comes and grabs my head and lifts it, and I can get my bearings, and I go, oh, this is fine. Let me just dust myself off, and let's not pretend you didn't see anything, but can I give myself some grace and understand that sometimes when you're in the thick of these things, it's a little difficult to get your perspective just right. Because underwater is underwater, and letting go of the fact that you were there as long as you were, at least in my experience, is something that I try to implement every chance I get. Because if you focus on, oh, I was in that puddle for a week, 2 weeks, I was drowning and I didn't say anything, now there's all this wasted time, it kind of takes away the joy of being able to breathe again. So letting go is just one of those things where if it doesn't serve me, I put it in the discard pile. There's a specific journal for this discard pile, I might add. And I can't quite burn it after reading, but with technology these days, there are ways to make that happen, I'm sure. And it's a beautiful thing because little by little you realize your emotional home had its own kind of natural state, a natural way of existing. Call it a natural emotional state. And you realize that all these things that you're unable to let go, like this background here, is filled with a great deal of things. And one by one, they kind of tilt the scale towards some other way of being for this emotional home. And you might be spotless and just loving, and that's just how you choose to operate in the world. But little by little, baggage or what have you, experiences that you don't process, you start moving towards bitterness or resentment or just being miserable when that's really not who you are. And in trying to attain new perspectives on almost anything, just by asking questions or doing some research and trying to ponder the other side, I found myself letting go of more and discovering that my emotional home is just vulnerability, being open, going back to the introduction, being vulnerable, being open, just being loving. That's what comes easiest to me. As soon as I started getting rid of the dead weight, it just was second nature. And then I started to ponder it and realize that it was first nature. It was the original nature before I started building those walls. And I mean, those walls around your heart get high enough, and God bless your perspective at that point, at the top of that wall, looking down at everything and everyone, thinking you have all the answers, at least in my case, because you could read into a couple things here and there accurately, choose not to ask and just assume. But what happens is when you're empirical and you question everything, eventually you're able to let go of enough that you're no longer doubting your perceptions. But that's the exact point where I realized I needed to continue to do so with a fine-tooth comb. Because in letting go and realizing that certain triggers are the size of a hair and the reactions outwardly are dwarfed by the reaction on the inside, and being able to course correct that and just have the perspective that this time last year, something might have set me off a lot worse than today. Or I might have set somebody else off by assuming something or pretending to know anything, right? And it's beautiful simply because that is proof of growth. And that's one of the biggest things. We often grow in ways that we can't measure from one day to the next. But give it a few weeks, give it a few months, check that scale again and again, and you start to see a curve or a spike or what have you. And that progress on a wide enough view will let you know exactly how far you've come. And it just ties into not feeling that way in the moment. But if you could project yourself forward and think, oh, I can lose a couple pounds a month. It doesn't seem like much, but a year later, that's 20, 30 pounds. Just by doing what you can and setting manageable goals, And it's just a matter of perspective and knowing that sometimes some things you need to do are not going to be immediate gratification. Sometimes you have to delay it and it's going to be worth it. And you kind of have to ride on the what it's going to feel like to fuel yourself. And it's a beautiful thing, especially when you are in your home the way it's always been meant to be. In my case, loving and vulnerable, right? And just being grateful that you're able to take a step back and look at the bigger picture as often as you can and just appreciating it. Thanks for the view. And speaking of that view, I mean, the views you hold at 15 differ at 25 or 18 and 28 or 30 versus 40. And that's another matter of perspective. The things that you thought were going to matter, some of them do and some of them don't. And some of them matter the whole way. And the beauty of that is you're allowed to change your mind. You're allowed to change your priorities. So I'll ask you guys, what are some perspectives that you're grateful changed or remained the same over the years? Leave those in the comments. And I'm going to be experimenting with a structure starting next week. And I'll fill in the details on that. And you can reach me in the comments, of course. I'm going to be working on providing other ways to reach me in the descriptions of the videos, as well as Spotify, Apple, and what have you. But I do invite you to comment and share in the comments, rather, if that's something you're up to. I was locked out of my YouTube for a little bit, so I wasn't able to comment, but that's been rectified. Two-factor authentication is great, but sometimes you put it on an old phone and oops. Oh, but in any case, thanks for joining me yet again. And if you haven't already, give us a like, subscribe to the channel, give us a follow. Let us know. And until next time, bye-bye.